You've heard of the Nicea Council, right? But do you really know the real story behind that meeting that changed the course of the Christian faith? Most people believe that in the 325 after Christ, religious leaders gathered to assemble the Bible, choose which books worth, or even to invent the divinity of Jesus Christ. But in practice, the story is much more complex and even a little shocking. It has political dispute, theological fight, imperial manipulation, and an empire in crisis trying to save one's skin. If you already suspected you had something behind the official version, congratulations, your intuition was on the right track. In this text, we will unravel the backstage of the Council of Nicaea, show how Emperor Constantine put order in chaos using religion as a tool for power, and reveal the consequences that echo to this day in the Christian faith. Get ready to know the truth that no one told you, that they preferred to hide. Many people believe that the Council of Nicaea was the moment when the Church decided which books to be part of the Bible. But this is a myth. The true focus of that meeting in the year of 325 after Christ was to solve a theological crisis that threatened to divide the Christian faith. The central question was not the biblical canon, but the understanding of the nature of Jesus Christ. That is, the goal was to preserve the unity of the Church, not to assemble a sacred index. In practice, the council was a response to the growing Arian controversy, which was inflammating the debates between Christian leaders of the time. Arius, a priest of Alexandria, claimed that Jesus was divine, but not eternal or equal to God the Father. This vision put the very base of the Trinity and the divinity of Christ into check, generating theological and even political tension. It was like trying to keep a family together while half of her believed her son was just a special servant. This kind of disagreement, in a Roman Empire that was already overwhelmed by internal conflicts, was too dangerous to ignore. Therefore, Emperor Constantine summoned the council not to discuss verses or gospels, but to solve a war of ideas that threatened to break the nascent Christian orthodoxy. The goal was clear, sealing a theological definition that ended the divisions, even if it cost the exile of those who did not agree with the verdict. The root of all the turmoil that led to the council was a seemingly simple question, but with gigantic implications: is Jesus Christ of the same essence as God the Father, or is an inferior creature, though divine? Arius said that Christ was created by God and therefore had a beginning. This idea, although it seems subtle, threatened to crumble the doctrine of the Trinity and place the faith on a collision route with itself. Arius' view, known as Arianism, quickly spread, generating factions within the church itself. It was as if every bishop had to choose one side in a silent war or not that silent. The debates were inflamed, the letters flew, and even the simplest faithful began to discuss about the consubstantiality of Christ. Theological confusion has become a time bomb, about to explode in the heart of the Roman Empire. Given this division, the unity of the church was at risk, and with it, the long-awaited stability of the empire. Religion and politics were already too intertwined so that one did not affect the other. If the church cracked, the empire was shaking together. Therefore, it was urgent to define, clearly and officially, what was the true view of Jesus Christ. And that's when the council came into play as a theological court with real consequences and much power involved. Constantine was not exactly a theologian in love with doctrinal debates. What really moved was the desire to maintain the cohesive and functional Roman Empire. For him, the division caused by Arian controversy was not just a religious problem, it was a direct threat to peace and public order. The emperor knew that if the church ruined inside, the ruiria empire together. And so, with a strategic look, he decided to act. It was with this spirit that Constantine summoned the Council of Nicaea. He played the trip of the bishops, paid lodging, and even organized the structure of the meeting. It was as if the emperor had become the CEO of the Christian faith, bringing together the greatest spiritual leaders to resolve an impasse that was already leaving control. Your goal? Forging a unified Christian orthodoxy that guaranteed stability. And if for that you had to press, exile, or manipulate, that was so. And don't think he was just watching. Constantine participated actively, encouraged consensus, and even intervened when the spirits were exalted. In the end, those who did not sign the Nicene Creed, the new milestone of Christian theology, was considered rebellious and punished. The empire used religion as political glue, and the council became a showcase of how imperial influence could shape even the foundations of faith. The question that was in the air was who was really running the church? The great fruit of the Nicaea Council was the Nicene Creed, a short but gigantic historical document. In it, the bishops officially declared that Jesus Christ was consubstantial to the Father, that is, of the same essence. This statement buried at least on roll the idea that Christ was an inferior creature. It was as if the Church had finally signed its theological identity, creating a line that separated Christian orthodoxy from heresy. The impact of this was huge. For the first time, there was a unified doctrinal position on the divinity of Christ. The creed became a kind of certificate of faith for those who wanted to remain within the limits of the official church. Today, it is still recited in many churches around the world, living proof that the council was not just a political event, but a milestone that deeply shaped Christian theology. And all this happened under the attentive look of a Roman emperor. But it is good to remember it was not a peaceful consensus. Many signed by pressure, others reluctantly, and some were simply banned. Constantine did not accept half-term. Nicene Creed was not just a spiritual statement, it was a forced unification tool, aligning faith and imperial politics. What began as a theological debate became an official faith document and a watershed for the future of Christianity. And, of course, that would still generate a lot of confusion. Despite the theological focus, the council also addressed practical issues that were generating confusion and conflict among Christians. One of them was the date of Easter. The communities celebrated on different days, which weakened the idea of a unified church. To resolve this, it was decided that Easter would be celebrated on the first Sunday after the first full moon of spring. It seems simple today, but at the time it was a strategic step to reinforce the unity of the church. Another point discussed was the discipline of the clergy. The church needed leaders who were examples, both in the pulpit and in personal life. Then rules were imposed that prohibited, for example, that bishops, priests, and deacons live with women who were not close relatives. The intention was to avoid scandals and preserve the public image of the Christian faith. It was an attempt to align morality and ministry at a time when religion and reputation were side by side. These decisions show that the council was not limited to the high spheres of Christian theology. There was a clear effort to standardize important behaviors, practices, and dates, aiming to maintain order in a diverse intentions. The mixture of religion and politics became increasingly evident. The Christian faith was becoming institutionalized, with norms, rules, and a common calendar. And all this happened under the direct supervision of imperial power. Even with all the pomp of the council and the strength of the Nicene Creed, Arianism has not disappeared. On the contrary, he remained influential for decades, finding support between bishops, Christian communities, and even emperors who came after Constantine. It is like trying to put out a fire with a bullshit. The flame of theological controversy was still lit, only now under the carpet of official orthodoxy. Heresy had not been defeated, only pushed into the shadow. The most ironic is that Constantine himself, who had exiled Arians and defended the consubstantiality of Christ, was baptized by an Arian bishop shortly before he died. This raises a provocative question: did the emperor even believe in the decision of the council, or did he only follow the flow to maintain peace? It is clear that the imperial influence was more concerned with the stability of the empire than with the purity of doctrine. Faith, in this case, was a tool, not an end in itself. And so, the Council of Nicaea, which should have closed the Arian controversy, ended up giving rise to new conflicts. What was supposed to be the end of a debate became the beginning of a new phase of disputes, now even more politicized. The label of heresy was used as a weapon to silence opponents, and the unity of the church was still a difficult ideal to achieve. All of this proves that faith, when placed in the hands of power, does not always walk in a straight line. One of the greatest misunderstandings about the Council of Nicaea is the idea that it was there that it was decided which books to be part of the Holy Bible. This version of history circulates to this day, but has no solid historical base. The biblical canon was the result of centuries of debates, lists, and traditions that varied from one region to another. In Nicaea, the focus was on the deity of Christ and in the unity of the church, not in the organization of Scripture. The confusion may have arisen because, after the council, Emperor Constantine ordered the production of 50 Bibles to be distributed in Constantinople. But beware, this does not mean that it has defined the content of these Bibles. He just asked for copies probably based on the most accepted texts at that time. That is, it was a logistics action, not an official canonization. Anyone who studies Christian theology and the history of the Church knows that the canon process continued well later. This myth that the Council invented the Bible is repeated in books, documentaries, and social networks. But the truth is far less conspiracy and at the same time, more interesting. What Nicaea really did was strengthen a doctrinal line that would influence, yes, which texts would be valued in the following generations. But the list of sacred books would remain in dispute for a long time. This is where we see how the decisions made their left echoes deep and lasting in the Christian faith. Contrary to popular belief, the Council of Nicaea did not bring lasting peace. He even tried to seal the unity of the Church, but ended up opening doors for new tensions. Those who did not agree with Nicene Creed was labeled as heretic, and this transformed divergence into reasons of persecution. The Christian faith, which was born as a message of love and transformation, began to be confused with decrees, sanctions, and power disputes. From there, the line between doctrine and politics became increasingly blurred. The empire, using religion as an instrument of control, began to define who or not a true Christian. And this had serious consequences. Entire communities were persecuted, leaders were deposited, and the diversity of thought was suffocated in the name of Christian orthodoxy. It was the beginning of a cycle in which dogmas would be reinforced by strength, not only of faith. Interestingly, when trying to resolve a theological crisis, the council eventually generated a number of other crises, both spiritual and political. The use of imperial power to impose doctrinal truths created a dangerous precedent. Faith became a battlefield. And so, the Council of 325 after Christ, thought of as an end point, became a starting point for a long journey of conflicts, councils, and divisions within Christianity itself. After all this, the question is how much of the faith we know today was shaped by devotion, and how much was forged in the embers of politics and power. The Council of Nicaea, in the year of 325 after Christ, shows us that religion and empire have walked together for a long time, not always in the same direction, but almost always with the same interests. The search for theological truth has often turned into a dispute of influence, and it invites us to reflect: what is authentic faith? What comes from God? And what was decided by man? If this content aroused your curiosity, you to look at the story with more attentive eyes, and made you think in a new way, then you've taken a big step. Take advantage of this impulse to go deeper. Subscribe to the channel, enable notifications, and follow our next videos. There is still a lot of hidden history between the lines, and we will dig it up, one truth at a time.